Well, thank you, Ron, for that great introduction. Why don't I just welcome everybody to this session, and thank you, Ron, for inviting me to speak. Just to give you the 30-second overview of how I came to AWS, I'm a senior solutions architect. My name is Dale Houghton. I actually started in hybrid cloud. It was my first cloud experience almost 14 years ago. I was working for an e-commerce company, and we put them in the cloud and did a hybrid solution for them. And I was not with AWS at that time, but I'm working up to that. And then I went to a company that actually did hybrid cloud adapters. And so very early on, I was actually working in with some concepts that were developing around that time. And then I did a stint with a data analytics company, and then ended up with AWS about 3 years ago. So now I serve a lot of different sectors, and very happy to be here with you today. Um, Before we start, I'd like you to think about the most resilient person that you know. What are the characteristics that make you think of them that way? And what is it about them that you would describe as resilient? And then the chances are that those are some of the same characteristics that you'd like to have, and I'd like to have as technologists in our application architectures. So while we're looking at the hybrid cloud architecture today, we'll be framing some of the discussions around resiliency, and I'd like you to keep that in mind as we move forward. So I'm first going to make the case for resiliency very briefly, just so that everyone has a level set on what it is and why it's beneficial. I'm going to go into some use cases for hybrid cloud adoption. Chances are one of those might be your use case, which is great. If it's not, that doesn't mean that there aren't other use cases. These are just some of the common ones that I see. I'd like to talk about some hybrid cloud tenants. These are, you can think of these as best practices, right? Golden rules, however you want to think about them. They're things that really, to implement hybrid cloud resiliently, they're good to follow. We're going to look at some reference architectures for hybrid cloud connectivity. Connectivity is extremely important. It's probably one of the most important considerations when you're going to hybrid cloud. And that's based on the types of workloads and what you're trying to do. So we need to look at a couple of just basically example architectures for that. And then, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't cover some of the AWS services that support hybrid cloud and give you some insights on that. And then bringing it all together, I'd like to go over some use cases and just tell you how these organizations actually made use of hybrid cloud in a very effective way. Okay, so let's first define resiliency. Resiliency means the ability to respond and recover from adverse changes or failures. And specifically in technology, it encompasses some of the concepts of reliability, durability, and operational efficiency. So those are the things that we want really, and that's used as a starting point for a lot of our discussions. So when you think of the resiliency benefits of the cloud, you first have to look at what are some of the resiliency challenges on-premise, what are some of the shortcomings? And I think if you look at that list, I'm not going to read the list because it's there, you can read it. And I think most of you will agree that those are some of the challenges you're facing. And those might be some of the reasons that you're looking to go to cloud. And that might be some of the reasons you're looking to do hybrid cloud. It's just mainly is that the on-premises, there's limitations, there's cost barriers, there's time constraints, there's staffing constraints. When you go to the cloud, some of those economies of scale, some of those problems have been solved for you. And there's new capabilities available, and there's new ability to innovate in the cloud because your resources and your people are doing things that are now more innovative instead of working on the general maintenance, the heavy lifting tasks that we can handle for you as a cloud vendor. So some of the reasons to do resiliency are not always obvious. So I have this slide here, and this is the cost of resiliency, and I don't want to get into cost because this is not a cost discussion. But some of you who are in security may think of risk assessments and things like that. The business side, though, they look at a lot of these factors here, which are people, technology, and data, and organizational. And so when you're thinking of resiliency and you're thinking of your workloads and you're thinking of your hybrid cloud, you have to keep these things in mind because ultimately they are going to have both short-term and long-term costs to your organization. If not explicit costs, these are implicit costs. And these are some things that I think you're probably familiar with, but I'll just call out one or two in each category. Customer service unavailability is definitely a cost factor, right? But there's also the impact on your employees, employee morale, attrition, being able to attract employees. Technology and data, compromised security posture is number one, right? That has a breadth and depth scope within the organization. It affects almost everything in there. But there's also things like loss of data, which affects your organization, and damage to reputation. There can be cost factors, governmental fines. The list goes on and on. That's a deep category. So that's another discussion. But I think you get the idea that there's a lot of considerations and there's a lot of value in adding resiliency to your workflow, to your workloads. Okay, so let's look at some of the use cases briefly for hybrid cloud adoption. I think the first one that you'll see a lot of is that when there's a lot of workloads to migrate, hybrid cloud is very successful in that, like when you have hundreds or thousands or even tens of thousands of apps to migrate to the cloud, a hybrid cloud solution is definitely advised for that because of the complexity of doing that. Cloud services on premises. Sometimes you need cloud services, the capabilities of cloud services closer to your data center, either for data residency or latency issues, any of those types of things that you need to try to tackle. And so cloud services on premises can accommodate that. Cloud burstings, that's where you go the other way. That's where you say we're out of room here. We don't have enough room for storage or data, and we need to be able to go to the cloud when we need those resources on a very short-term basis. And sometimes that can be a long-term basis, but then usually people are adopting more of a hybrid cloud, more of a substantial hybrid cloud investment when they're thinking about a long-term investment in using the cloud for that purpose. Backup and disaster recovery, that's been talked about on some of the previous speakers today, and I think that's definitely a good use for this. If you need to be able to store data and be able to store or have business continuity in a place that is not your on-premise data center or not in one location, and that's for obvious reasons. Distributed data processing. We actually have a use case on this today, which I think is a very good use case that I'm going to describe. Basically, it talks about we have certain resources in our data center. We want to do this type of processing, and we need other specialized resources for that. And so cloud is a very good option for that. And it allows you to do machine learning and other types of things that are not specifically in your wheelhouse to be able to take those to the cloud. Geographic expansion, right? That's kind of an obvious use case for this, but it's not always brought up. It's essentially being able to expand your operations to another part of the globe, and having a cloud presence on the other side of the world is fairly easy to do. Building a data center on the other side of the world and staffing it and being able to maintain it is very difficult to do. So that's another very valid use case. Edge computing. This in the last 3 to 5 years has just ballooned. Essentially processing data and doing storage at either hard to reach or manufacturing locations. Essentially, that gives faster real-time analytics and real-time feedback for those processes. And so you'll see that more and more as we go forward because the capabilities are there now, where maybe 10 years ago they weren't. Now they're there. ISV and software compatibility. this is a very valid use case. Maybe you have some type of licensed software on premise and you're at the extent of your license, yet you need more capabilities and you need that same product, that same license number maybe. And so going to Marketplace, AWS Marketplace or other marketplaces and being able to get that product is a very valid use case for hybrid cloud. Okay, so what are some of the rules to live by, best practices, aka tenets for hybrid cloud? And these are not all the rules or best practices. There's many, right? But these are probably what I would say and what AWS would say would be the 5 most important tenets to live by. Operational consistency. We're going to have, again, a use case later that talks about this. It's very important from the standpoint of again, lowering your implicit cost for higher maintenance, lowering, staff retainment, all of those types of things. With operational consistency, it improves those positions for you. Simple to control, manage, and secure. That seems obvious to me, but I do sometimes see scenarios where people are trying to manage things differently on premise versus in the cloud, and that goes back to operational consistency. But it gets more complicated when you don't have a consistent model, starting with operational consistency. And so being able to control and manage, and the last one is most important, secure it in a uniform manner is probably essential for the long-term success of your hybrid cloud plan. Build once, deploy anywhere. So for all of the Kubernetes and containers fans, that's something that is really applicable here, right? You can do that with containers and Kubernetes and container services like ECS very easily. But there's also those capabilities with some other services I'll be talking about in a event. I'll show you a use case on that. Enterprise class application service level agreements. So that's very important, right? How reliable are the services that you're depending on? There's a saying that says you're only as resilient as your least resilient component, right? So make sure that when you're building your hybrid cloud that you incorporate services that are resilient themselves and that have good SLAs for you to be comfortable using them. And then leverage existing skill sets and tools. That's obvious, but that's just to keep your costs down. And so when you're going to a hybrid cloud, make sure that you're first utilizing what you have in-house before you try to reinvent something else. Okay, let's look at some reference architectures for hybrid cloud connectivity. Now, let me first say that I'm not a network guy, so we're not going to get into any detail, so you don't need to tune out for this session. This is a very easy session to follow. I'm just going to give you the high-level view of these, and you'll be able to grasp what I'm telling you. The first is the tried and true site-to-site VPN, and that's a good model. It's a flexible model. It's a very quick model to put up. And I put an additional upgrade on this particular diagram, which is I use the accelerated option, which basically then it connects to edge locations of AWS versus to a region, which gives you the fastest time onto the AWS network with your VPN. The next is it's actually a more persistent connection. It's a dedicated network connection called Direct Connect. And if you look on the slide, there's a couple of VPN failovers on there. So that's a very common scenario, right? Direct Connect is that consistent connection because it goes to a telco and they connect it and it connects directly into the AWS service. The advantage here is you can create virtual interfaces directly on the AWS cloud, and then also the traffic does not go over the internet. It goes all the way on the AWS network from the telco. So that reduces the chances of any kind of bottleneck or something that you might experience from the internet. This model this is a good diagram because it just shows that even in direct connect gateways, direct connect, you want to consider redundancy, right? So here we're showing 2 direct connects in region A, and it's using a direct connect gateway, which is as another device to simplify your life, and that connects back to the VPCs or the cloud environment. And that's a very common model right now. And so I think that's a great way to go, especially to have flexibility later on with the gateway. And then you see on the other side, way over on the left, there's a transit gateway. So that's a way of connecting your VPCs together, independent of the direct connect gateway. So a lot of flexibility, a lot of items that you want to look at if you're wanting to be expandable as you go on. Okay, and this is a variation on that. This is even a more highly resilient one because it gives you essentially 2 separate direct DX locations, and they're connecting to 2 different regions. So a multi-region might have something that looks like this because it gives essentially the highest resiliency to your direct connects and to your gateways. And so you see there's another region down here, region B and region A. So that's the type of thing that you consider when you're looking at a multi-region type implementation. Okay, so what are some AWS services that support resilient cloud architectures? And I'm going to skim through these fairly briefly because you can look these up on our website, I'm sure, and you'd rather see something more relevant like the use cases. But I do think it's important to highlight that these are services that you do want to look at if you're considering hybrid cloud. So AWS Outpost briefly just gives you the same AWS capabilities in your data center. So it allows you to run AWS infrastructure and services on premises. So that's what it is. So if you're using EC2 or you're using some of those services, you can run the same service on premise in your data center. Storage Gateway, that's a great service. It gives you a chance to actually create a storage mechanism on site that links up into S3. So it basically gives you a huge storage capability, and it can do that with either files, volumes, or tapes. Give you the ability to do backups or even secondary storage in the cloud. I think everybody knows we partnered with VMware to do VMware Cloud. And so that's a great service that allows you to be able to, again, perfect example is burst or disaster recovery in the cloud onto the VMware Cloud. Wavelength is an interesting offering. It actually is in the 5G networks. And so if you have low latency requirements for your mobile apps, we actually have servers and infrastructure running in those 5G networks to be able to give you that low latency that you're looking for. And then local zones, we actually have a use case a little later that I'm going to talk about that used local zones to run latency sensitive apps. Basically, a local zone, you can think of that as AWS has gone into major metropolitan areas, and put in servers and put in things that enable low latency to those major centers. And that's because people need that in that area. And also there's a greater chance of bottlenecks because it's a major metropolitan area. And ECS anywhere is basically it's where you have the same control plane, ECS for on-site containers versus and also cloud containers. So ECS controls those, so that's something that we offer. And then EKS anywhere is Kubernetes, same sort of thing. It basically allows you to run your Kubernetes with a consistent a consistent deployment method. And as I'm going to show you again in the use cases, some companies that have used these things successfully. And there's some other key services. Obviously, this could go on, but these are 3 call outs that I think I wanted to make sure I mentioned, and that is Systems Manager, because that's an operational system, and operations is always very close to my heart because I worked in that a lot. It allows you to manage operationally on-site resources similar to you would cloud resources, things like patching, monitoring, things of that nature. And then CloudWatch is a monitoring service that does just what I said. It actually allows you to monitor and store logs and alert on logs in both on-premise as well as in the cloud. And then AWS Directory Service is something that's important, and you can do your AD services in the cloud, you can do them on-premise, or you can federate between the two, and that's totally doable. And we have services that do that.
Hey, Dale.
Yes,
We've
sir.
just got about a minute or 2 left. I want to keep things focused, so I want to make sure we spend this on the case studies. Perfect.
Okay. Yeah, I had 3 minutes on my clock, but that's okay. We got a minute or 2. I'll just go really fast on these, Ron. So the case studies is what I'm at now. So basically, CMC. If you take a look at it, they did. They used the ECS platform to be able to, bridge their problem of wanting to deploy consistently anywhere. And so essentially that was their issue, right? They wanted to be consistent about their deployment method. So they went in and they used ECS. And I'll just do 2 of these because we are running low on time, Ron, and I appreciate for the call out. And then another one of these is that really is interesting is Page. They actually used our P4D instances, which is a high performance computing instance in the cloud. But that allowed them to basically do machine learning in the cloud, which is something that they're doing for cancer research. So a lot of them basically do parallel processing in the cloud at the same time on premise. And so that was something that they utilized that for. And 2 I'll just mention these. LegalZoom used our local zones. Yes, they used our local zones to be able to get faster workloads. And then Morningstar is the last one. And actually, they migrated to the cloud and they used Outpost, which is the one where you can actually, the service where you can actually put all of the AWS service, not all of them, some of the AWS services in your data center. And Ron, sorry I lost track of the time, but hopefully I finished on time.